Hello, and welcome to the continuation of the essay Postmodernism and Performance. The next subtitle that the author gives us is called Periodizing Postmodernism in Theatre and Dance. So far, he's given us a general introduction about, he's tried to define postmodernism, he's tried to define performance, and he's told us the problematic issues that exist in that sense. Okay. Then he told us the different ways in which we can look at postmodernism and how it influences performances as such. In this portion, he begins on a very important note. He says that what counts as postmodern in any art form is dependent on what is considered to be modern in that same art form. Okay, so what it means is that only if you know what is modern can you define what is postmodern. Okay, because it is supposed to derive from what is modern, right? So in every discipline, in every art form, this will differ, since there is already an existing unevenness in what is considered to be as modernism in any discipline, in any art form, and this same unevenness is passed on onto postmodernism. Okay, so the unevenness in postmodernism is the result of the unevenness in modernism. Okay, then he goes on to talk about a dance historian and critic called Sally Baines. Okay, and about how she tries to define postmodernism in dance in one of her works called Terpishko in Sneakers. Okay, and here she talks about the transition in modern dance, which became evident from the 1950s onwards. Okay, and this was not just a historically or a chronologically, postmodern or a phenomena that happened. Just like we talked about in the previous section, that she's not just saying 1950s in a generic or in a chronological sense of the term, but even stylistic transitions and differences were evident from this period onwards. So from 1950 onwards, we can say that postmodernism became evident in dance. Okay, so modern dance had refined its styles and its theories and has emerged as a recognizable dance genre. So modern dance became recognizable from its earlier versions that existed. It used stylized movements and energy levels in legible structures to convey feelings, tones, and social messages. Okay, feeling that the bodily configuration modern dance drew on had ossified into various stylized vocabularies, dances had become bloated with dramatic, literary, and emotional significance. So a dance was no longer just a dance. Okay, there was a lot of meaning that was built into every move that was made, and every context was brought into dance, and this is something that happened in the modern period. All right, the first wave of postmodern choreographers sought to create dances that would be non-literary in content, created from accessible movement vocabularies. Okay, so it is in modernism, everything was contextual, there was a lot of meaning in every move, but in postmodern dance forms, postmodern choreographers, what they tried to do was to create dances that were non-literary in nature. Okay, their content had nothing to do with literature, but rather it was about how the movement itself was speaking for itself. The movement itself became a vocabulary. Okay, and then she goes on to talk about how the multiple styles of dance after modern dance, you cannot bring them down into into one particular style, but is still able to offer a persuasive narrative of postmodern dance. So Sally Baines is not able to reduce the entire thing that she's talking about into a significant, noticeable a style that came up in the postmodern period, but she gives us a persuasive narration of the entire phenomena as such. And she says that this postmodern dance began as a reaction to modern dance, and there is an identifiable historical period during during which this happened, and that is supposed to be the 1950s, right? Then in dance we are able to find that clear transitional period. All right, but on the other hand, in something like theater, it is much difficult to find a clear transition. Okay, because a coherent description of modern theater is difficult to construct. What do you call modern, right? We have discussed many plays in this semester, and we have tried to find out certain characteristics, certain evidences of modernism and postmodernism in the plays that we discuss, right? But it is very difficult for us to find a very coherent description of modernism as such in theater. Usually, modern theatre connotes realistic plays. Remember when we discussed the key terms at the beginning of the semester, we talked about how realism, naturalism was something where modernism began, right? So sometimes what we usually do is that when we see realistic narratives, we consider them to be modern, okay? And these kind of realistic performances began somewhere around the mid of the 19th century with writers like Ibsen and Chekhov. We've already discussed this in the previous essay that we learned about. Okay, so you can even say that in the United States, in the United Kingdom, it came after the Second World War. So to identify modern theater with realism is but simplifying that the postmodern impulse in theater. It's not possible for us to just say that just because realism came, that is how modernism came in theater. That is a gross simplification. Okay, and then to go on to explain postmodernism would be anti-realistic, is what the author tells us. The problem there is that the anti-realist theater developed along realized theater. So even when realist theater was being produced in the 19th century, on the other hand, anti-realist theater like the ones produced by symbolists were also prevalent. All right, so we cannot say that from the Second World War onwards, we had only modern theater, because the anti-realist theater also existed. Okay. This confusion obviously has made it very difficult for us to find a moment of modernism within theater as such. But we have examples of writers such as Bertolt Brecht and Samuel Beckett, who were playwrights that challenged the realism equally radically, okay, though from very different directions. The kind of writing that Beckett and Brecht did were completely different from each other. They were like coming at postmodernism from two different directions. Okay, but again, the question that comes, if we consider that Ibsen and Chekhov began modernism, and with Brecht and Beckett we had postmodernism coming up, how do we say who is to be considered as a modernist, who is to be considered as a postmodernist? Or do we consider Brecht and Beckett as transitional figures, as figures who were you must have studied in a history of English literature about transitional poets and everything. So were they belonging to that transitional period between modernism or postmodernism, or can we call them as modernist or postmodernist? That is still a problem of confusion here. Okay, this is further complicated by the relationship between text and performance that we have. Okay, in dance, performance style and genre are encoded in the choreography. That means as soon as you see the choreography of a dance, you know that this is, yes, the movements, the costumes, the way in which this music is played, everything points to whether it is modern or postmodern. Okay, in theater, style is not written into the dramatic text. Okay, so that is the difference between text and performance. In text, you don't say that this has to be performed in a modern or a postmodern manner. The style is never written into the text. Okay, even though there might be some theater, some production cues written into text, it still never explicitly states whether it should be produced in a particular manner. Okay, so it is possible for us to even produce a Shakespearean play or even a Greek tragedy in a like Oedipus Rex can be produced in a postmodern style. Macbeth can be produced in a postmodern style, even though obviously they were not written in a postmodern style, right? So that style is not written into the text, and that's why when we look at performance and text, there is the problem of how this style is to be brought out, or which style do we use in a particular text, is a problematic thing. Okay, in music also, okay, this cannot happen, because a 19th century opera is written in a certain manner. Okay, in operas also they are written in a certain musical style, and hence it cannot be staged in a postmodern style. So in music, it's not at all possible. And as our author told us in the beginning of the essay, that's probably why he's not looking into music as a performance in this particular essay. Okay. Postmodern theatre hence cannot be understood without exploring questions of postmodern drama and production styles. Okay, so you can't understand theatre without looking at, how postmodern drama is defined and how production styles are influencing the writing or the text as such. So there are many layers of understanding postmodern theatre. Pluralism, however, is a postmodern phenomena. Okay, when we look at how do we try to understand postmodernism in theatre, one of the main pointers that the author gives us is pluralism. Okay, before a particular period, like before the Second World War, most of the characters that were depicted, the actors who played those characters were all all mostly white. Okay, there was no identity politics, there was no social movement that was brought about in theater. Women playwrights, playwrights of color, queer playwrights, they were not represented, nor were they, popular in that period. But we can say in the postmodern era, okay, we can see a lot of these representations happening, representation in terms of women, in terms of people of color, in terms of people belonging to different sexual orientations. All of them are being imbibed into the text itself. Okay, similarly, non-traditional casting, there was a whole row about how when the cursed child, Harry Potter's considered to be its continuation, but most people don't believe it. So anyways, when the cursed child as a play was put up on stage, okay, there was a lot of problems happening because Hermione was played by a black woman. Okay, and it broke away years of imagination that we had as Emma Watson, who played Hermione in the film. And many people were pointing out how in the text, in the original Harry Potter text, it was never mentioned that Hermione is a black woman, except for the fact that she has curly hair. So we can see that that is postmodernism in Harry Potter. Maybe J.K. Rowling was trying to be a bit more, inclusive of differences when she was writing that particular play, and that's why she chose, to write. She did not think of it. It was the directors who thought of casting a black woman. But that kind of an action of casting non-traditional people, okay, people not belonging to a white race or not belonging to a particular gender, is something that is a postmodern phenomena. Right, so that is one thing that can help us understand postmodernism is theater, and that is pluralism. Okay, there are a lot of representations of different types happening in postmodern drama that did not exist in earlier kind of theater. Okay, so that is what he talks about in postmodernism and uh, theater or dance as such. Okay, moving on to the next part, the next heading is titled Performance Art Monologues. Okay, so postmodern plurality of voices is particularly evident in the monologue performances. That is also a postmodern phenomena. Even though there were many monologues that were written by Shakespeare himself, like the master himself, but still in the 1980s and the 1990s, there were entire plays written in the form of a monologue. That means, usually when you read Shakespeare's play, you see that monologue is a part of the whole play. But in a postmodern play, sometimes a monologue is the entire play, right? So this genre actually originated with Spalding Gray, who was a veteran of New York experimental theater. And, he put up intensely autobiographical performances that were seen as acts of self-scrutiny. So, he himself was an actor, right? And whenever he was on stage, he would be opening up his soul to the audience. So those were acts of self-scrutiny. He was trying to find himself. He was trying to identify himself through those performances. Okay, and again, he worked with the Wooster group on the Rhode Island trilogy, which are also highly abstract performances. Again, in all of those, these monologues are what seem to be even more important than any other part of the play. All right. then, although Spalding Gray himself was a white heterosexual man, that means he was not plural in the sense. Okay, he was an American male of upper middle class origin, but he helped to open the door to performers who self-consciously represent a range of different identity positions. So through his own performances, he was opening many doors to others who did not have the kind of um, uh, uh, opportunities that he did, I would say. Okay, so he, through his different experimental pieces, he was opening door to a range of different performers who belong to different identities. Okay, and when I say identity, I mean racial identity, religious identity, gender identity, all of that. Okay, so that is where we'll stop for this particular section. The next one, the depth of the character postmodernist drama, will be discussed in the next video. Okay, so please continue listening since you don't have much time for your exam. Thank you.